All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Have you ever wondered why a single simple sentence can sometimes send a way deeper shiver down your spine than a full-blown 2-hour horror movie? Well, today we are pulling apart the exact anatomy of a scare. We're going to look at the precise architecture of micro-horror, basically unpacking how just a handful of words can engineer absolute pure terror right from the ground up. So we're starting with this brilliantly simple, honestly chilling line from our source text. When Ian asked why, the villagers exchanged frightened glances. I mean, just think about how much heavy lifting those 10 words are actually doing. We don't know who Ian is, we have no idea what he's asking about or what the history of this village even is. But instantly, we know there is profound danger. The author doesn't bother describing a monster, they just describe the collective reaction to it, and honestly, that's more than enough to hook us right in. Which leads us to a really fascinating question. How much does it take to truly terrify us? It turns out it really doesn't take much at all, as long as the right psychological buttons are being pushed. In this explainer, we're going to dissect the specific techniques writers use to essentially hack our nervous systems in a matter of seconds. We're talking about things like environmental design, sensory limitation, and deep psychological implication. Now, if Ion's story is all about the terror of a group, fear actually operates completely differently in total isolation. Which brings us to our second source fragment, exploring isolation in the blue glow. Let's meet Ali. He represents that deeply personal, super claustrophobic dread of being entirely, undeniably alone. Night, 2:13 a.m. Ali sits on his bed, lit only by his phone's blue glow. Okay, picture that. It's exactly 2:13 in the morning, the absolute dead of night. It's that specific time when the rest of the world is fast asleep and you are just utterly cut off. Ali's in his bedroom, totally alone, and the only light source is that artificial, cold blue glow of a phone screen. It creates this incredibly stark, immediate visual contrast. This tiny, illuminated lifeline in his hands, completely surrounded by an oppressive, infinite darkness. What's really interesting here is how the author describes Ollie's room as messy and shadowy. This is a perfect example of environmental storytelling, using physical surroundings to silently convey dread. A messy room isn't just some throwaway detail. Think about it. In the dark, visual clutter creates false positives for our eyes. We've all been there, right? A pile of laundry suddenly morphs into a crouching figure, or an open closet door becomes this gaping, terrifying cavern. The environment itself is doing the heavy lifting to make us feel unsafe before anything actually happens. We can actually deconstruct Ollie's terror by isolating the specific sensory inputs of fear that the author meticulously layered into this single moment. Visually, you've got that harsh phone glow casting deep, messy shadows. Then there's the auditory input, or rather the total lack of it. A tense, eerie silence. And you know how deafening silence can be when you're wide awake at 2 in the morning. Toss in the psychological element, Ollie's confusion and anxious whispering, and you have this flawless formula for anxiety. The brain is starved of clear inputs, so it basically goes into overdrive trying to detect threats. Let's look at the escalation of tension here, because the timeline is brilliant. We start at 2:13 a.m. with that baseline of vulnerable isolation in the dark. Then, bam, the phone wakes. That sudden burst of blue glow is our first real jolt. Next comes the notification, Hamza, voice message. Now that just has an ominous tone to it, but the truly terrifying part isn't the message actually playing. It's the tense, eerie silence right before. The dread is suspended entirely in that agonizing anticipation. And then, this source text zeroes right in. Close-up of Ollie's shocked face, eyes reflecting the screen, subtle shadow distortion in the room, hinting at something unseen. It pushes our anxiety right to the breaking point. Because his eyes are reflecting the screen, we're basically forced to look directly at his reaction, rather than whatever the threat is. And in the periphery, a subtle shadow distortion. It's not a monster jumping out of a closet, it's the actual physics of the room breaking down slightly, which heavily hints that whatever is attached to that voice message has physically manifested right there in the room with him. This whole comparison poses a fascinating question. We've just explored the absolute vulnerability of being alone in the dark, constantly doubting your own senses. But let's pivot back for a second. Is it actually scarier to be alone, or to see your fear reflected in others? Comparing these two scares brilliantly illustrates the two totally different sides of horror. On one hand, you have isolated fear, Ollie alone in the dark, bathed in blue light, whispering in confused anxiety. This relies entirely on self-doubt. Like, is he imagining the shadows? Is it just a harmless text? But then, on the other hand, you have communal fear, Ion and the villagers sharing a tense silence and exchanging frightened glances. There is zero room for self-doubt there. If an entire village looks at each other in pure terror just because you asked a simple question, the threat is undeniable. It is completely real, and literally everyone knows about it except you. When those villagers silently look at each other, it is a textbook example of social contagion. This is the psychological phenomenon where emotions, like raw panic, rapidly spread through a group via social cues. We are biologically hardwired to look to our peers to assess danger. Imagine a flock of birds suddenly scattering. The one bird that didn't even see the predator still flies away because of the group's reaction. In this story, Ion is that one bird. Those frightened glances serve as an undeniable evolutionary alarm bell. So whether it is Ollie trapped in an isolated bedroom or Ion standing in a tense, quiet village, the core mechanism generating our fear is exactly the same: the power of the unseen. The absolute paralyzing terror comes from what the author deliberately chooses not to show you. Just take a look at what the text deliberately leaves out. Neither scenario gives us the monster. We don't get to hear the actual audio of Hamza's voice message. We don't see the source of those shadow distortions in Ollie's room. And we have absolutely no idea what terrifying truth the villagers are hiding from Ion. Think about it. If the author told us exactly what the shadow was, it would instantly become a known quantity. It would be a concrete problem to solve, rather than this creeping, infinite dread. By leaving these crucial details out, the narrative turns into a terrifying interactive puzzle for us to solve. So what is lurking in your own shadows? By withholding the answers, the author essentially forces our own minds to fill in the blanks, which really proves that ultimately our own imagination is the greatest horror writer of all. The blue glow of a phone, a sudden text message, an unanswered question, these are incredibly mundane things, but when they're framed with the power of the unseen, they become totally paralyzing. So the next time you're sitting in the dark at 2 a.m. and the shadows in the corner of your messy room look just a little too distorted, ask yourself, what exactly is your own imagination trying to warn you about?